I have served the Duke of Morthwaite for 15 years, and in all that time I had never seen him afraid of a door. He stood outside the solicitor's office on the high street of Aldenmere village for a full 3 minutes before he knocked. His coat was immaculate. His gloves were squared. His jaw was set in the particular way I had come to recognize as the face he wore when he intended to feel nothing. I stood 2 paces behind him, as was proper, and I thought, he has faced down creditors, a dissolving parliament, and a wife who despised him, and it is a solicitor's door in Shropshire that undoes him. He knocked. "Come," said a voice from within. It was not the voice of an old man. I heard the Duke breathe once, a small thing, barely a sound, before he turned the handle and went in. I had pieced together the story across 15 years of service, in the way a valet does. From a letter he once left half burned in the grate, from a name he said once in a fever, from the particular silence that came over him on the Shropshire road 2 days before we arrived. Her name was Isabel Crane. He had known her when he was 23 and not yet the Duke, only an heir, only a young man who had loved a solicitor's daughter in the uncomplicated way of men who do not yet understand what their freedom costs other people. He had promised to return from his grand tour within the year. He had not returned for 22. There had been reasons. There are always reasons. His father's decline, which kept him on the continent managing the foreign holdings. Then the brief, catastrophic marriage to a woman of appropriate station, which lasted 3 years before a fever took her and left him with grief he could neither name nor spend. Then the dukedom itself settling on him like a stone mantle. 22 years in which Morthwaite Park had been managed by agents and Isabel Crane had managed herself. I had asked the innkeeper about her the previous evening, as one does. The innkeeper was a broad woman with an unsentimental face, and when I mentioned Miss Crane, Mrs. Crane, I had asked, she had corrected me without ceremony. Miss Crane, still, by her own choice and no one else's. She had taken over her father's practice upon his death 12 years ago, a thing so irregular that the county had talked of nothing else for a full season. Then she had continued to do it so capably that the county had eventually talked of other things instead. She drafted wills and land agreements and tenancy contracts for half the families in 3 parishes. The Duke of Aldenmere, 40 miles north, had tried to engage her services for a particularly knotted estate dispute last spring, and she had written back. The innkeeper had been told this by woman who'd been told it by the Aldenmere housekeeper, that she had sufficient work, thank you, and wished him well with it. She was 44 years old. She had built something out of nothing, quietly and without applause, and the county had come around to admiring her the way people admire a thing only after it has made itself undeniable. I relayed none of this to the Duke. It was not my place, but I thought about it as I stood in the corridor and listened to the door. The first few minutes I could not hear well. Voices, low and formal, an exchange of courtesies, the business of the estate. The Duke had a legitimate reason for the call. A tenancy agreement that had been in Miss Crane's custody, drawn up by her late father on behalf of the previous Duke. Legitimate, tidy, the kind of excuse a man constructs when the real reason is too large to name at a door. Then the voices changed, not louder, the opposite, the kind of quiet that has weight in it, then nothing for some time. Then the Duke came out. He looked. I shall describe it precisely, because I was watching precisely. He looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting to find the ruins of something, and had found instead a standing building, well-maintained, with lights in every window. He looked, in short, as though he had no idea what to do with himself. He walked past me without speaking. I followed as was proper. We did not speak until we were back at the park, in his study, with the fire going. He stood at the window with his back to me for a long time. "She is well," he said finally. "Yes, Your Grace?" "She did not." He stopped, began again. "She was not angry." I said nothing. She was courteous, professional. He said the word as though it had done him a slight injury. "She found the tenancy document in under a minute. She had it indexed. She has the whole practice indexed." A pause. "My father's solicitor was a good man, but he could never find anything." I kept my face in order. "She asked after the estate," he said, "whether I intended to keep the home farm running as it was, or whether I planned to consolidate. She has 3 tenant families whose agreements fall due in the spring, and she wished to know whether to draft renewals or prepare for notices." He was quiet again. "She asked it as though I were anyone, as though I were a client." "You are a client, Your Grace." He turned then and looked at me. It was not a reproachful look. He was not a man who wasted reproach on servants. It was the look of a man who has said a thing out loud and found it lands differently than he intended. "She is not what I left," he said. "No, Your Grace." He seemed to find that sentence too large to finish. He turned back to the window. I knew what she was. I had seen her for only a moment, when she had seen the Duke out to the corridor, and I had caught the briefest look at her. Dark eyes, unhurried bearing, the kind of stillness that comes not from timidity, but from a person who has long since decided they have nothing to prove. She was not waiting. She had not been waiting for years. Whatever she had felt when he did not come back, she had used it for something else, and the something else had made her into someone considerable. That was, I suspected, the problem. He went back the next morning, without a pretext this time. He left me at the park, which was irregular. The Duke of Morthwaite did not go unaccompanied into village, and I watched him go from the stable yard and thought, well, there it is. He was gone 4 hours. When he returned, he went directly to the library and sat there without sending for anything until nearly 7 o'clock, when he rang for tea and also, as an afterthought for me. "Lo," he said, "Your Grace, I have asked Miss Crane to marry me." I set the tea tray down with appropriate care. "She said she would consider it," he added. I found I needed a moment. "I see, Your Grace." She was very measured about it. She said she did not doubt my sincerity. She said she required 2 days. He looked at the window. Outside, the late autumn light was going fast, orange along the tops of the beeches. She said she had spent 22 years building a life without me in it, and she would like 2 days to determine whether it made any sense to alter that. He paused. "She was not unkind." "No," I said. "I don't imagine she was." The 2 days were the longest I had spent at Morthwaite, and I had spent some difficult ones there. He was not agitated. That was not his way. He was simply very still. He ate adequately. He walked the home farm in the mornings and inspected the accounts in the afternoons and did not speak, unless spoken to. He slept, as far as I could tell. But there was about him the quality of a man who has set something valuable down on a table and is waiting to learn whether someone else will pick it up. On the morning of the 3rd day, a note arrived. He read it standing at the hall table, still in his greatcoat, before I'd had the chance to take it. He read it twice. Then he folded it with great care, the way a person handles something they intend to keep, and put it in his breast pocket. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Have the carriage brought round, Lo?" "Of course, Your Grace. Where are we going?" He looked at me, and there was something in his face I had not seen in 15 years of service. Not relief, exactly, and not triumph. Something quieter, the look of a man returning to a room he had once been foolish enough to leave. "Aldenmere," he said, "to fetch Miss Crane. I had the carriage round in 7 minutes. It was, I think, the fastest I have ever moved in 15 years. She was waiting at the door of the solicitor's office when we arrived. In her good wool coat with the dark collar, a small trunk beside her, as though she had known what her answer would be before she asked herself the question. She looked at the Duke when he stepped down, and he looked at her, and whatever passed between them in that moment was not mine to see clearly. But I saw him offer her his hand, and I saw her take it, not as a woman rescued, not as a woman claimed, but as a woman who has weighed the matter and decided, after 22 years, that she has waited long enough for him to deserve her. She had, and he knew it. He handed her into the carriage, and I closed the door, and I took my place on the box, and we drove back to Morthwaite Park, through the cold Shropshire morning, with the beeches bare on either side, and the road running straight and clear ahead. Some things, I have learned, are simply a matter of time. The trouble is knowing whose time it is. It had always been hers.